Yo, welcome to my channel. I want to start some album reviews, and where better to start than Nas's debut album, Illmatic. So the album was released on April 19th, 1994, as you can see on the screen as well. It has 10 tracks, 5 singles, a whopping 5 singles, which are Halftime, It Ain't Hard to Tell, Life's a Bitch, The World Is Yours, and One Love. It has a Hall of Fame level of producers, with DJ Premier, Large Professor, Q-Tip, Pete Rock, LES, and Faith N. The only feature is AZ, but it is a very memorable feature, and it's on a prominent song on the album. And as for sales, although it was like a widespread critical acclaim, its commercial performance at the start was pretty modest, but over time it grew into a cultural and commercial success and eventually reached platinum. It started off as gold in 1996, platinum in 2001, and it finally became double platinum in 2019. But I think it's one of those albums where you don't really look at the sales. It's more the impact, the influence, and pretty much just how good the album is start to finish. It's widely considered, if not one of the best, if not the greatest hip-hop album of all time. But, whether I think that or not, you'll find out later in the video, but we'll go through that now. And before I get into the track-by-track reviews, the album cover has become pretty iconic, but I've always liked this album cover as it captures the essence of Nas. You see a younger picture of him, and you got Queensbridge as the backdrop with an emphasis on that orange and reddish colour tone of the cover, and the back of the cover showing the grittiness of the streets, which adds character to the album cover, the album cover knows what it is and it's not trying to be pretty, just like portrays the streets on the back, and I think that adds a lot to the album. Alright, so now getting into the album, the first track, as you can see on the track list, is The Genesis, which is a really well done album intro. It's influenced from the movie Wild Style, as it uses a sample from the clip and the instrumental from the soundtrack, while Nas, AZ, and Jungle discuss their goals and aspirations, going back and forth talking, not really rapping but just talking over the beat. And it closes with Nas saying, representing it's Illmatic, leaving you ready to dive straight into the album and eagerly waiting for the next song. And the next track is New York State of Mind, which is one of the most well-known songs on the album. Primo drops a vintage raw instrumental which pretty much has you hyped, but equally focused as you listen and observe Nas's lyrics. He drops some of his most famous lines on this one, such as I never sleep because sleep is the cousin of death. Well, there's not much more to say about this one because it's just simply iconic, and it's probably the most well-known song, or if not one of the most well-known songs on the album. Moving on to the third track now, which is Life's a Bitch. LES hooks up a feel-good, euphoric instrumental in which Nas and his good friend AZ bless the mic. Now AZ is the only guest feature on this album, and they both spit equally impressive verses. Many people say AZ's verse on this is as good as any other guest verse in hip-hop history. Another thing to mention is the live trumpet adds another layer to this track, and it was actually played by Nas's dad on this one. Yeah, this song's definitely one of my personal favourite joints on this album. Really a fan of this one. Now the fourth track and one of the other singles, The World Is Yours. Pete Rock drops a beautiful instrumental around the hypnotic piano loop and his signature heavy drums underneath it. Nas effortlessly becomes one with this beat. And along with New York State of Mind, this may be the most recognizable song on this album. A lot of quotables on this one, and again, not much to say because this one's a very well-known one and a great track. Now to the last track on the first half of the album. Fittingly for that matter, it's called Halftime, which was originally released in 1992. Produced by Large Professor, who puts together a hard, bass-heavy, booming instrumental in which Nas raps over with a consistent flow and somewhat different pacing to some of the other tracks on the album, probably because it was recorded much earlier. Yeah, I rate this one really highly and adds a different element to the album as well. The next track is Memory Lane, which is the first song on the second half of the album. It's also called Sitting in the Park, produced by DJ Premier again, who provides Nas with a mid-tempo, soulful instrumental that just screams nostalgia. If you hear the instrumental, you'll know for yourself. Very fitting to Nas as well, who pretty much spends his time in this song walking down memory lane with his lyrics. This is definitely my favourite track on the album, as well as my favourite instrumental, and it's probably in my top 3 Nas tracks of all time. Yeah, can't really say too much more about this one. It's very influential in my hip-hop journey, and I love this one. Repeat this one a lot. The 7th track on the album is One Love, produced by Tribe Called Quest's very own Q-Tip. The instrumental is melodic and has a distinctive instrument in the xylophone, which creates a hypnotic sound, creating a great space for storytelling. Nas raps about letters he sent to his friends incarcerated, painting ill pictures with his words. This track can bring out a lot of feelings. It's a really good track. It's Q-Tip's only production credit on the album, and it adds yet again another point of difference to the album overall. Alright, getting on towards the end of the album now. We go to track number 8, One Time For Your Mind. Large Professor provides a drowsy, slow, funky beat, giving Nas an easy ride to flow on. In my opinion, this is probably the weakest song on the album, but it doesn't make it a weak track. It's just swimming in a lake with some pretty big fish. I mean, there's a lot of heavyweight tracks on this album, and it definitely doesn't mean it's a skip either. It's just the level of competition. Because it's a review, I'm comparing it to a lot of the other tracks, and that's how I feel about it. It's also, I think, it doesn't fit as well as the other tracks, but ultimately it's still enjoyable, especially when listening to it as a whole album, track by track. Track number 9 is Represent. Primo gets his 3rd and final production credit, and once again, everything he touched on this album was gold. A cold, somber sounding beat in which Nas represents his hood and discusses everyday happenings within that hood. This track's another one of my personal favourites here, and one of the first I remember hearing from this album, so it gets extra points for that as well. This track sounds even better when you're listening to it when it's a real cold, chilly day. And now finally, the last track on the album, It Ain't Hard to Tell, which is also one of the singles on the album. Large Professor finishes it on a more lighter, upbeat sounding instrumental in which Nas flexes his lyrical ability. A fitting, positive end to the track list of Illmatic. So that's the end of the track by track reviews, and I'm going to now conclude the rest of the album and my thoughts on it. So ultimately, in conclusion, this is one of my favourite albums of all time, not only because of the content in both lyrics and production, but the nostalgic value and the influence it had on me. Nas being my favourite MC has a big impact on that as well. Among my favourite albums of all time, this could be as high as top 3 or as low as top 7. Either way, it's very highly rated from me. My favourite tracks are Memory Lane, Life's a Bitch, Represent, One Love, Halftime, New York State of Mind, and The World Is Yours. Although it's a non-skip album for me, and I most enjoy this when I listen to it from start to finish, just like an album's meant to be listened to. Now, whether or not I think it's the greatest album of all time, I think that's subjective. It's a very hard thing to label an album like that, but I think it's definitely up there as one of the greatest ever albums made. The album is short and sweet with no filler. It's aged very well, has timeless tracks, and captures an essence of time that is no longer available. And this album has the rare ability to make you feel present in a time and a place like 1994 Queensbridge with Nas. He set the standard for lyrical dexterity on Illmatic and was pivotal in the resurgence of East Coast hip-hop in the early to mid-90s. Every song is filled with strong lyrical content, and an elite cast of producers combined made this album what it was, a masterpiece. So that's my review of Illmatic. I hope you all enjoyed. Feel free to comment on any albums that you'd like for me to review. I'm keen to work on more album reviews and hip-hop related content. Peace. Stay tuned for more.